There is one thing a man can do that no amount of arguing, crying, or begging ever accomplishes. He can simply stop. Not stop loving. Not stop caring. Stop performing. Stop explaining. Stop chasing an approval that was never going to be given freely in the first place. And the strange thing is, the men who finally learn this rarely announce it. There's no speech, no ultimatum, no dramatic exit. One day they are simply different, quieter, steadier, less available in a way that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with self-respect. If you've ever poured yourself into someone who never noticed the cost, you already know the pattern. You over-explain a decision that needed no explanation. You replay a conversation for hours trying to find the sentence that upset her. You forgive things you never even said out loud you were hurt by, because keeping the peace felt more urgent than keeping your dignity. This is mental fortress, and today we're talking about what happens in the mind and character of a man once he stops handing his peace to someone who was never protecting it, and why that quiet shift, more than any argument ever could, is the moment everything changes. This isn't a video about getting revenge on anyone. It's not about being cold or petty or performing indifference to prove a point. Stoicism was never about punishing other people. It was about no longer being ruled by them. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his private journal to plan how to make anyone regret anything. He wrote it to master the only thing that was ever truly his to master, himself. That's the version of strength we're building toward today. Before we go further, if any part of what I just described sounds familiar, if you've ever been the one who tried harder while someone else coasted on your effort, tell me in the comments where you are in that process right now. Still explaining yourself? Already gone quiet? I read every one of them, and there's something powerful about naming where you stand out loud. Because here's what's coming. The real shift doesn't happen when you decide to leave, or when you say the hard thing out loud. It happens somewhere much quieter than that. And most men never even notice it happening until they're already standing on the other side of it. Let's talk about how it actually starts, because it's almost never dramatic. It starts with a man who cares, genuinely, deeply, and who expresses that care the only way he knows how, by giving more patience, more understanding, more second chances, more silent forgiveness for things that were never acknowledged, let alone apologized for. If you've lived this, you know the shape of it. You weren't naive. You weren't weak. You were simply someone who believed that consistency and effort were a kind of language, and you kept speaking it, hoping it would eventually be understood. The problem isn't that caring is wrong. The problem is what happens when care is met with comfort instead of reciprocity. Somewhere along the way, your steadiness stopped being appreciated and started being assumed. Assumed the way people assume the sun will rise. Not with gratitude, but with the quiet, unspoken belief that it will simply keep happening regardless of what they do. That's not necessarily cruelty. Often it's just human nature. We tend to invest less in the things that feel guaranteed. But guaranteed or not, the toll on the man doing the giving is real, even when nobody else seems to notice it. Here's the part that matters most, though, and it's the part Stoic philosophy actually has something useful to say about. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from what happens to us, but from our judgments about what happens to us. Applied here, that means the real damage was never simply, she didn't value me enough. The real damage was the years spent trying to control something that was never within your control to begin with. Someone else's attention, someone else's effort, someone else's willingness to show up. You cannot make another person value you. That was true on day one, and it's true today. What you can control is what you do with your own time, energy, and self-respect while you wait to see whether they will. That reframe is uncomfortable because it removes the villain from the story and replaces it with a much harder question. How long was I willing to keep investing in something that wasn't investing back? Not out of blame. People are complicated, and most relationships drift for reasons on both sides, but out of honesty. Because the moment you can ask that question without needing to punish anyone for the answer, something in you loosens. You stop needing her to change so that you can feel okay. You start being able to feel okay regardless. That single shift, from needing someone else's behavior to change in order to feel at peace, to building peace that doesn't depend on them at all, is the entire foundation of everything else in this video. And it usually arrives in a moment nobody sees coming, Sometimes in the middle of an ordinary week, when a man realizes he's been holding his breath for a very long time and finally, quietly, lets it out. So what does that shift actually look like in practice? Not in theory. In the small, daily, almost boring decisions that add up to a completely different way of living. It starts with noticing your own patterns before you act on them. The instinct to double text when she goes quiet. The urge to over-explain a simple boundary because you're afraid of how it will be received. The habit of shrinking a request down to almost nothing so it won't cause friction. These patterns feel automatic because they were built over a long time, often long before this particular relationship. Sometimes going back to childhood, to a household where love felt conditional on being easy, agreeable, low maintenance. Recognizing that a pattern is old doesn't excuse it, but it does make it easier to interrupt because you stop treating it as who I am and start treating it as something I learned and can unlearn. The practical version of that unlearning is simple, even if it isn't easy. You start responding to messages when you're actually ready, not the instant they arrive. You start allowing a silence to exist without rushing to fill it with your own anxiety. You start saying what you actually think, even in small, low-stakes moments, instead of pre-editing yourself down to whatever seems safest. None of this requires a single confrontation. It requires 100 small, private decisions that nobody else will ever see you make. Something unexpected tends to happen once this becomes a habit rather than a performance. Your relationships. Not just romantic ones, but with friends, family, co-workers, start reorganizing themselves around the real you instead of the accommodating version you'd been offering. Some people lean in, curious about this steadier version of you. Others, who are used to the old dynamic, get uneasy, even irritated, without fully understanding why. That reaction says far more about what they were used to receiving than it says about you. The Stoics had a word for the discipline underneath all of this, prohairesis, the faculty of choice, the part of you that decides how you respond regardless of circumstance. Epictetus considered it the one thing that could never be taken from a person, no matter what happened to them externally. Practicing it daily, in small moments, is what eventually makes it available in the big ones. The moment someone tries to guilt you back into an old pattern, and you find, almost to your own surprise, that you simply don't reach for it anymore. That's the moment worth sitting with for a second, because it's the one most people underestimate. It's not the breakup, or the big conversation, or the dramatic walk away. It's the ordinary Tuesday when an old trigger fires and nothing happens, because there's no longer anything there for it to catch on. We're not there yet in this video, but we're getting close to the part where that becomes fully clear, and it's worth staying with me for. Now let's go deeper, because there's a root cause underneath all of this that most people never fully name, and it isn't about her at all. It's about what you were actually chasing. For a lot of men, the thing that felt like love was actually closer to proof. Proof that you were worth staying for. Proof that your effort mattered. Proof that if you just gave enough, eventually the return would arrive and confirm what you'd secretly been afraid wasn't true. That you were, in fact, enough exactly as you were without needing to earn it through relentless effort. That's an understandable thing to chase. It's also, structurally, an impossible one, because no external person can permanently supply a sense of worth that was never theirs to give in the first place. They can reflect it back to you. They can't manufacture it for you. This is the part where the reframe gets uncomfortable but also genuinely freeing. The work was never actually about her seeing your value correctly. It was about you no longer needing her, or anyone, to see it in order for it to be real. Seneca put it plainly. No one is more enslaved than the person who is a slave to their own desires, and the desire for someone else's validation is one of the heaviest chains a person can carry, because it's invisible. You don't feel the weight of it until the day you finally set it down and notice how much lighter you are. That's usually the moment things visibly change on the outside, even though the real work happened entirely on the inside. Not because you decided to act different to get a reaction, but because you no longer need a reaction to feel steady. That distinction matters. There's a world of difference between calm as a performance and calm as an actual internal state, and people can usually tell which one they're looking at, even if they can't articulate why. If any of this is landing for you, if you recognize yourself in the pattern of giving more than you were getting back, chasing a version of proof that was never going to arrive, Do something small right now, like this video, and send it to someone you know is stuck in the exact same loop. Sometimes the most useful thing you can hand a friend isn't advice. It's a 15-minute video that says the thing they haven't been able to say to themselves yet. Because here's what's still ahead, and it's the part that ties everything together. Once you stop needing anyone's validation to feel whole, something shifts in how you show up in every relationship going forward, not just the one that prompted all this reflection. Here's the layer most people miss entirely. This isn't really a video about a breakup or about winning some invisible contest of who cares less. It's about what becomes available to you once you're no longer spending your energy managing someone else's inconsistency. Think about how much bandwidth gets consumed by that management. Wondering what a text means, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, adjusting your mood to match someone else's before you've even checked in with your own. That's not a small tax. Over months and years, it's a significant portion of a person's emotional and mental energy, spent entirely on trying to stabilize something outside of your control. When that energy gets returned to you, it has to go somewhere. For most men who go through this shift, it goes into exactly the places it should have been going all along. The work that actually matters to them, friendships that were quietly neglected, physical health, the kind of ordinary daily discipline that builds a life you don't need to escape from. This is where something genuinely surprising tends to happen, and it's rarely what people expect going in. Many men assume that letting go of the need for someone else's approval will feel like loss, grief, emptiness, a hole where the old craving used to be. In practice, most describe the opposite, a kind of quiet that feels less like emptiness and more like room. Room to think clearly. Room to make decisions based on what you actually want instead of what will avoid conflict. Room, eventually, to be genuinely present with people again instead of guarded or performing. None of this requires you to become hard or detached or incapable of caring about people. That's a common misreading of Stoic philosophy, that the goal is to feel less. It isn't. The goal, as the Stoics actually taught it, is to feel clearly, to care about the things worth caring about, and to stop handing your peace over to things that were never going to honor it. A man who's done this work can still love deeply. He's just no longer available to be taken for granted while doing it. And that's the piece worth carrying into everything that follows. Because the final insight in this video isn't really about any one relationship at all. It's about the kind of man this process leaves behind and what he does with the life that's now fully his. So here's where all of this actually lands. The point was never to become unreachable or cold or immune to caring about people. The point was to stop confusing self-sacrifice with love and to stop mistaking someone else's comfort with your effort for actual reciprocity. Real love, the kind worth building a life around, doesn't require you to disappear in order to keep it. If it does, that's information, not a problem to solve through more effort. What Stoicism actually offers here isn't detachment for its own sake. It's a return to the only thing that was ever fully within your control. Your own judgments, your own responses, your own sense of what you will and won't accept. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private reflections not as a man trying to win anyone over, but as a man trying to become someone he could respect when he was alone with his own thoughts. That's the real measure. Not how someone else responds to the new version of you, but whether you actually respect the person you're becoming. If you've been in the middle of this shift, pulling back not out of bitterness but out of self-respect, choosing your peace over old patterns of chasing, that's not coldness. That's not giving up on love. That's the beginning of being able to offer love from a place of wholeness instead of need, which, if we're honest, is the only kind of love that actually lasts. This is Mental Fortress. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, if you want more of this steady, grounded approach to becoming the kind of man you actually respect, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so the next one finds you when you need it. Until then, protect your peace, keep your standards, and keep building the life that doesn't require anyone else's permission to be worth living.